So before we do anything, before we talk about anything, or before we employ any of these ideas into our teaching or performing practically, I'd like to take a step back and think about our teaching philosophy for a second. Make sure you understand as many different types of learning as possible and understand as many different types of learning styles as possible if you're a teacher. There's a tremendous amount of research and work that's available that's been conducted in this area by professionals in music education and music research that far transcend the work that I've done personally in this area. Make sure you exercise receptivity about your students. I want you to learn about your students if you're a teacher. This should take place before you employ any of the teaching techniques or before you decide on a curriculum for that given student. Especially in the private lesson setting, as teachers, we have the opportunity to address each one of our students individually. Make sure you learn about their learning style preference before employing teaching techniques. There's many different types of learning that can be very different from one another. And if you're teaching in a group atmosphere, I suggest you teach a single topic by employing a large variety of teaching techniques that involve different types of learning about the same example. The two different types of learning I'd like to talk about throughout this DVD are the following: declarative and non-declarative. The brain processes these two types of learning in very different ways. Declarative learning is also described as cognitive learning, or explicit learning. This is cognitive information, verbal instruction, and uses mental imagery for recall. Non-declarative learning, however, is what I'm going to be talking about for the most part on this DVD. And non-declarative learning is what's most related to the activities and the teaching concepts that I'll be describing. Non-declarative learning is also synonymous with procedural learning and involves imitation learning and other forms of perceptual learning, such as visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, and in some cases haptic, meaning the sense of touch. There's been many studies that prove the distinction between these two types of learning, declarative and non-declarative. Statistically speaking, most of what we do in college, in academia, studying music, involves declarative learning. Now, of course, there's been many systems that involve a more experiential or sensory-based learning in music, and that's what I'm going to strive to do in this method as well. For more in-depth information and sources about this information, please make reference to my written document. Since most of the teaching concepts and guided activities in this method are body-related and kinesthetic and movement-based, take a special care in learning about your students' relationship with this learning style and relationship with movement-based activities in general. You'll have a very wide range of students who have different experiences with movement and athletics and body awareness. Try to gather as much background information as you can with regards to your students' experiences with movement. Also, do they have any physical limitations? Do they have any injuries? Are they handicapped in any way? These will all be very important if you're going to employ more movement-based activities in your lessons. Like I mentioned earlier with learning styles, it's also important to realize that some students don't respond well to movement-based learning, or kinesthetic learning, or haptic learning. Whereas it is integral to learning a musical instrument, it's important for you as a teacher to understand to what degree and to what extent you can employ these things in your teaching lesson plans when you prepare them. It's also a scientific fact that different people have different varying degrees of natural ability when it comes to physical coordination and physical movement. This is something else that's very important to understand as a teacher if you're going to start learning more about some of the alternative concepts I'm presenting on the method.